pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We only have one item of business, appointment of special counsel. Be it resolved that the Board of Education appoints Carbonaro Law PC as special counsel for the purpose of providing representation in connection with a certain investigation report dated August 4th, 2023, and authorizes the board president and/or the superintendent of schools to execute a retainer agreement on behalf of the board with Carbonaro Law PC. Do I have a motion? First, second? Second, any discussion?
Yes. I'd like to make point that I would like to make a motion to table this conversation.
That would have to be seconded and voted upon by the board, with the majority determining whether or not it is tabled.
So what does that mean?
That means if you look at a second and 3 votes, it's not tabled.
Okay.
I'll second it.
Now you have to take a vote, only 3, you need 3 in order to table the motion.
Wait, didn't they do first and second on this initially? Don't they have
Right.
to vote on that?
Right, they did a first, a second, now there's discussion, and at the time of the discussion, the board member moved to table.
Okay, so that's a separate
That's a
motion.
separate motion to table. It's been offered by Jennifer, second by Sam. And only on a vote of 3 plus
Right.
is tabled.
Why do you want to table it, Jen?
We could discuss it, so, we have before us an advertised board meeting for resolution to hire special counsel. That was recommended by our board president at the very last moment out of left field, and we still don't understand why we need special counsel. It's not explained as to why this is necessary. I would love an explanation on that, and this is coming out of an investigation that happened, spent over $35,000 over 10 months by recommendation of hiring an outside counsel by our counsel, Ingerman Smith, Mr. Powers, which we were recommended to hire Gercio, who has worked with Jericho School District many, many times, has worked with Ingerman many, many times, so that's a conflict of its own. But getting past that, because this is already talking about old news, we have a report, an investigative report, dozens and dozens of pages, that was a conclusive report, and not really sure why we need to hire special counsel at this point, spend more money, waste more of the district's time, when I think the 5 of us as board members are completely capable of reading the report and making any decisions necessary. Once again, it was a conclusive report. There was no open ends to it. It was very clear cut. And my last point is, which is I think one of the important points here to make, that we're being recommended special counsel to hire Mr. Carbonaro, which is a major conflict, because he has represented Section 8, he represents Section 8, which our superintendent, Mr. Grishman, is head of. That's a major conflict.
I'm not the head of Section 8.
Do you sit on the board?
Hmm?
Do you sit on the board of Section 8?
I sit on the board. There's a president of the board.
Okay.
I'm not in charge. The Section 8 is run by the executive director of Section 8, Pat Pizzarelli. He is the one who would interact with Mr. Carbonaro, not board members. So there is no conflict of interest.
Has there been, I'm sure, once again, there appears to be a conflict, because there has been, you guys have worked closely together, I'm sure, in the past. Have you guys never worked together?
As a board, as this board has worked with Mr. Power,
Correct, exactly.
a board of 20, 25 people.
But
I see no.
as a lawyer, and I'm gonna say this to Jill, she's a lawyer, if there appears to be a conflict, and this is something I'm sure you learned on your first day of law school, second day, week, whatever it is, there appears to be a conflict, there's a conflict.
That is not
I completely disagree with that.
Okay.
That's not what you're
And here's where we stand. In the executive session on August 14th, I explained to the board the need for special counsel. I'm not going to go into those details now, but I'll make it very general to the board, which is Gersio and Gersio investigated the matter. They generated a report. The report was dated August 4th, 2023. That laid out for the board 4 options at the tail end of the report. What I have recommended to this Board of Education is that you now need a third-party, non-investigating entity, Mr. Carbonaro, now explain to the board what those various options are, for the board at a certain point to decide which of those 4, if any, you're going to choose. That's why you need outside counsel at this point. His role is limited to 4 options that have been identified. Here are the pluses and minuses, the benefits and the burdens of each of those options. He will inform the board as to what those choices are, and then the board can decide what to do. He's not making any conclusions, he's providing to you additional guidance, which is important with a matter with this degree of sensitivity with a board member as the subject of the investigation.
So the four options were laid out, but nowhere in the report says that we need to hire another counsel to help us make a decision which of the 4 options. I think the 5 of us are completely capable, have all read this report, so why do we need special counsel, another special counsel, spend more money? Why can't we all 5 of us discuss the report and decide what we want to do?
Because the options were laid out in general terms. The options were not identified as to, for this particular fact pattern, here are the options that are applicable. So Gersio said, here are your options. Carbonaro would say, here are your options, and drawing upon the facts, here's what you can and cannot do. That's why you need him to come in here and to meet with you. And he's prepared to come in here as soon as next week. We're not going to slow this process down. You need guidance to present to the board what your various options are to make your right decision in an informed basis.
Once again, and I presented this question, what is the rush? What is the rush?
Because some of the options have a timeline. If
Okay,
you wait too long,
which have not been explained to.
that's why you need Carbonaro.
Okay, why couldn't Gersio advise us since they were already handling this?
They gave you the report. They were not charged with the responsibility of giving you exact recommendations for this fact pattern. They looked into the facts, they developed the facts, they identified options. Carbonaro will come in here and provide to you the benefits and burdens of each of those options.
Out of so many, hundreds of thousands of lawyers in New York, we pick someone that has worked alongside our superintendent. Nobody else sees this as a conflict?
He is a reputable educational attorney that used to work for an educational law firm. He represents individuals. He has a very good reputation. He's prepared to come in here and to give you the guidance that you need.
I never said he was not capable, but
He's
I'm saying there's a
capable.
conflict,
Okay, I disagree with that.
okay? Well, we're 5 of us. Does anyone else see a conflict here?
In terms of simply talking about the conflict, my understanding is you get a special counsel when you're afraid that there's a conflict. We've had our district's attorney opine on him not seeing there being a conflict. I think that at this point, unfortunately, we need to talk about Ingerman's impartiality over the past 12 months in recommending counsel to us. Most notably, in March of this year, Ingerman recommended that we conduct an independent investigation regarding the videos that were released on Project Veritas. That was what we were told was going to happen. Instead, we ended up hiring a lawyer from Ingerman to do that, and Ingerman told us there's no conflict. As we heard at many public meetings, that seemed completely crazy to say that there was no conflict there. This wasn't that we hired a lawyer, excuse me, Mrs. Citron, I'm
You're saying
speaking.
there was a conflict, can you explain what the conflict is?
Independent means free of conflict. We
Correct.
conducted an independent, and we were supposed to conduct an independent investigation. We didn't hire even a lawyer other from Ingerman Smith that doesn't deal with the district. We ended up using Mr. Goodstad, who sits in on our meetings, writes most of our policies. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but from the appearance of a conflict, I'm not sure how that qualifies as independent.
What's
To
the conflict?
Mrs.
What is the conflict? Who is there a conflict with?
There's a conflict between truth and the district, that He will write, again, I mean,
I don't
again,
understand, like, if you're trying to make a point that there's a conflict, can you explain what the conflict is? I
the
don't
conflict
understand.
doesn't independent mean free of conflict?
But I also don't understand, Sam, just because if this is the law firm that's hired to represent our entire district's well-being, isn't that who we want representing us, and something that potentially is affecting?
Dr. Balachandra, I agree with you,
So
but that's who,
please
okay,
explain
oh no,
to
of
me
course,
why
I'm
it's
trying to
not.
explain to you, that, yes, if we said we're gonna conduct an investigation, 100%, we're using Ingram and Smith to do the investigation. Ingram and Smith said you need to do an independent investigation, and in their mind, independent was having Mr. Goodstadt do it, and as you know, Mr. Goodstadt writes our policies, Mr. Goodstadt has sat in on our meetings as our counsel. So I'm not saying that it was inappropriate for Ingram and Smith to do that, but when it comes to understanding conflict and independence, I think Ingram and Smith has shown some poor judgment in that. Second case, as Mrs. Vartnoff just raised, earlier this year, we hired, or I guess last school year, I don't know at this point, we hired Gersio and Gersio to conduct this. At the time, none of us knew, but as Mrs. Vartnoff pointed out, there was a conflict with that firm. That firm has actually worked for the superintendent, defending the superintendent in a prior claim that he misused school district assets. Now, again, that was something that was never brought to our attention. So when we decided to hire Gersio and Gersio last October, we did not see that conflict. The superintendent obviously knew about that conflict. He never raised that issue with us. I expect that Mr. Powers and Ingram and Smith knew about that conflict. They never raised that conflict to
What
us.
was that conflict, Sam?
That
What-
the
what-
Gersio firm represented you in an appeal by members of a community about a misuse of district assets. That they represented you, and so again, it's strange to me
In
that.
what year was that, Sam? I bet. does it-
I don't remember when Gregory Gersio recommended you, it was many years ago, and look, full disclosure, Greg Gersio and the Gersio firm was successful. That despite what the commissioner said was sort of a weird set of facts, was able to get, the appeal dismissed on a procedural ground. But at the end of the day, they represented the superintendent.
In
So-
1992, 1993,
I
and
don't
Mr.
know yet.
Gersio is no longer an operating.
He's still a senior partner at the firm. Okay, again, I didn't go to law school. Over the years, I've hired dozens and interviewed dozens of lawyers for assignments. The first thing that those lawyers do is go through a conflict check. It's the first thing they say, oh, thank you very much for the phone call, let me go run a conflict check. I'm surprised that given that my understanding from the website that our superintendent is the Nassau County chairperson to Section 8,
I am not the chairperson, Sam.
that was what was on the website, that's how you're quoted in an article?
I am
where
the
you're quoted?
I am chairperson of the superintendent's committee. I am not chairperson of Section 8, so get the facts straight,
I
please.
can get you the article where you were quoted, and that's fine, that's why we're having the conversation, to clear the facts. But again, as Mrs. Vartnoff pointed out, I believe there are a few 100,000 lawyers, okay? I find it extremely strange that here again, we have a law firm that has a direct connection to the superintendent that's doing this. And as Oric Goldfinger would say, once is happenstance, twice is coincidence, three, it's some type of enemy action. So here we have an instance of the Gersio hiring, which had a direct impact, direct connection, as Mrs. Vartnoff mentioned, to the Ingram and Smith firm over many years, and a direct connection to representing the superintendent. Then we go to the use of the word, and Dr. Balachandra, I'm not saying there was anything wrong with Ingram in doing the investigation.
Yes, you
But
are.
again,
Your
Yes,
objection is
you
not
are.
used independently.
And Sam, can I-
no, hold on, no, I'm Mr. Superintendent, the board meeting, after I'm done, so to address your point, I'm not saying there was anything wrong with Ingram in doing it. What I'm saying is I believe Ingram shows poor judgment when they suggest whether there's a conflict or a party is independent, okay? And third of all, I actually am highly questionable right now, and I'm sure Mr. Carbonaro has a great reputation, I'm not questioning that. I'm surprised that in his letter to us, his engagement letter, he didn't mention that, the board should be aware that I have in a potential conflict, or some might view it as a potential conflict. Because I know when I've gotten engagement letters from lawyers who say this, I want you to be aware that this is a business that I do. Because again, I did not know about Section 8. I sent off a simple email, which all of the board members were copied on, to Mr. Powers and Mr. Grishman, asking specifically about prior work between the district or the administrators with Mr. Carbonaro. I did not receive a response. Okay, hold on. Again,
You did
if so-
receive a response.
I sent that email on Wednesday, right after Mr. Carbonaro was suggested to us. I did not receive a response. On Tuesday, I sent a second email to Mr. Grishman and Mr. Powers. Only then did I receive an email from Mr.
So
Grishman
you
saying,
did receive a response.
even then, just then, he sent a response saying that Mr. Carbonaro represents Section 8. Again, he didn't mention that he was the superintendent chairperson to this Section 8. He didn't even make it clear why he was mentioning Section 8 there. So again, I'm not saying that this is it, but we're a board, we're the best district in New York State. Is this the example that we're trying to set for other boards? Again, I'm not a lawyer, but I've had many lawyers say, it's not just a matter of a conflict. Mr. Superintendent, this is a board meeting. When I am done
Don't raise
speaking,
your voice.
I'm not,
Don't
you
raise
keep
your voice.
interrupting me.
Can I-
Anyway, no, you can't. Anyway, what I'm saying is, I've had many lawyers say, it's got nothing to do with whether there is a conflict of interest, it's the appearance of a conflict. And the fact of the matter is, our superintendent is involved in the hiring or the evaluation of this firm, and there's no reason for this district to put itself under that type of appearance that there is a conflict of interest. Now, I'm done speaking. Anybody else?
Might I raise the question? Sam, you taking a position on this, I would suggest might be a conflict of interest as well.
I'm not taking a position.
Yes, you are.
I'm allowed to
All
express.
I'm saying, to me, there's an appearance of a conflict of interest in you weighing in to the extent that you have in this discussion.
Okay,
Well,
And
I'm
I
the one
have
that brought
said
it up to
I
motion.
have said that from day one, that Mr. Perlman should not even be in the room for this
And
discussion.
I agree, and I think that in and of itself is very much a big conflict of interest.
have I ever voted on this? I have not
But you
voted
being
on
in the
this.
room during the discussion is inappropriate, and it's,
As a member of the public, I'm allowed to be here and have a and make comments. So
I have to
I'm
be heard. So, Mr. Perlman is taking shots at my law firm. Here is the advice that I gave for each of these two investigations. Concerning the Veritas investigation, the subject of that investigation was an employee. We at Ingerman Smith are perfectly capable of doing an investigation into an employee issue. There's absolutely no conflict. However, the dynamic changes when the subject of the investigation is a board member. It changes drastically. And textbook response to that is, Ingerman Smith, step out, stay out of this, bring in competent counsel, Gersio and Gersio, a very reputable firm to do the investigation. I stayed out of it. That's what the canons of ethics require me to do. I abided by that religiously. That report is generated, it's sent to the Board of Education, it identifies issues. Again, Ingerman Smith, in the exercise of good ethics, steps aside and says, you need to bring in someone else. Carbonaro knows what he's doing, give the board further direction. These two events could not have been handled more perfectly by my firm. I find it offensive, but I accept that. And I have now worked with you for 2 years. I fully expected you to do this, sir. But I tried to do my absolute best professional, ethically appropriate action to do the right thing by this collective Board of Education, who I respect and have worked with for 25 years. By bringing in Carbonaro, he can give this board good, solid advice. He has the ability as a professional to set aside any kind of prior contact he's had with anyone to do the right thing. He's prepared to do that, and that's why you should be voting on this today. That's my opinion.
And so I still question what the conflict of interest regulation, what the conflict of interest guidance in the Bar Association papers are meant to convey, if not deal with the situation. But I defer, and again, Mr. Powers, I have brought up points that I saw. As I said with the investigation about the Veritas videos, I'm not saying that there was malintent. I'm simply saying that what we're trying to do is come up with the most pristine process that we can come up with. And when you have this type of appearance, again, this was something I've only figured out in the last 48 hours. You say it's not proper. If I hadn't sent the question, no one here would even know about this potential appearance of a conflict. So again, I think it's absolutely appropriate, as I've done over the last 2 years on this board, as I've done over the last 12 years as a member of this community, to ask questions. And that's what I'm doing, and I ask the questions, and I get the answers. And your whole discussion about subjects and things like that, I take it all fully as what you believe, in your judgment, is proper legal advice. And what I'm trying to point out to my other 4 board members is that sometimes people just have wrong opinions. People have wrong judgment. I've made thousands of investments in my life, and some of those work and some of those don't. I think I'm really smart at it, but I still get it wrong. And here in this case, I think that perhaps the board needs to consider Ingerman's judgment on the issue. And again, as Mrs. Varga pointed out, there were 200,000 lawyers. This lawyer's not even a local lawyer, he's in Manhattan. And you're telling me the only lawyer, the best lawyer that you could find, the most appropriate lawyer that you could find, is one who has the appearance of, in my view as a layperson, has the appearance of a conflict. But as you said, I am done talking. I've asked my questions, I've made my point.
Once again, I'll just reiterate I think we should I wanna do a motion to table this. I'm reiterating that.
The
Okay.
motion's on the table.
Okay.
Okay, all in favor of tabling? So. All opposed? I call the question,
I'm sorry, Sam, what's your?
I recuse.
okay, all in favor of appointing Carbonaro Law PC as special counsel for, on behalf, whatever, the motion I said before. All in favor? All opposed?
Again, I recuse.
Do I have a motion to adjourn?